When someone loses love for you, they will first do these two things. Old Stoic wisdom. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Elie Wiesel. Love rarely vanishes with a thunderclap. It doesn't always end in screaming matches or dramatic goodbyes. More often, it slips away in silence, like a flame that quietly runs out of air. No warning, no declaration, just distance. You'll notice it in the smallest things. A gaze that used to linger now drifts away. A voice that once lit up when saying your name now sounds routine, almost mechanical. And you'll wonder, what changed? But no one will give you an answer, because when someone loses love for you, they don't always say it. They show it, not out of cruelty, but because love doesn't disappear in rage, it dissolves in disconnection. One day you're holding hands, the next you're holding memories. You stand side by side, yet you've never felt further apart. There's no argument, no closure, just an unspoken absence growing louder by the day. It's one of the hardest truths to face. When someone's heart moves on, they rarely tell you directly. But Stoic wisdom teaches us this. Your peace lies not in controlling another's love, but in understanding your response to its loss. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The pain doesn't stem from their emotional distance. It comes from our refusal to accept it. We cling to how it used to be. We romanticize the past while ignoring the present. But if you pay close attention, the signs are always there. The farmer and the falling leaves. In a quiet village surrounded by tall hills and wide open fields, there lived a humble farmer named Elias. He was a man of simple pleasures. He rose with the sun, worked the land with care, and returned home each evening to the one person who made all his labour feel worthwhile. Her name was Liana, his wife, his love, his home. Their life was not perfect, but it was theirs. Shared glances over dinner, quiet laughter in the garden, soft whispers before sleep. Years passed, and though time aged their faces, Elias believed their hearts remained the same. Until one autumn, something changed. It was not a single moment, no argument, no betrayal, just a subtle quiet, a colder gaze, a shorter response. He began to notice that Liana no longer waited for him by the door. Meals were prepared, but left on the table without a word. She no longer asked about his day, nor did she share much about hers. At first, Elias thought she was tired. The season was changing after all. Maybe it was just a passing mood. But as the weeks went on, the distance grew. Her eyes wandered elsewhere. Her mind seemed occupied by thoughts she no longer shared. He tried to bring back the warmth. He brought home her favourite bread from the town market. He tended the garden with extra care. He even read aloud the poem she once loved. But her smiles were no longer real. They were polite, distant, as if she was watching a stranger act out the role of a husband she no longer recognised. Elias felt lost. He spoke to no one about it, not the neighbours, not his brother in the nearby village. Instead, he packed a small bag one morning and walked toward the forest. It was said that deep beyond the woods, in a clearing where the sun never fully reached, there lived an old man known only as the Watcher. The Watcher was not a sage by title, nor a priest by duty. He was a man who had once loved, once lost, and chose to live alone where the world moved slowly. Those who visited him came not for answers, but for perspective. Elias found the Watcher sitting on a wooden bench outside a small cottage, watching leaves fall from the trees. The man said nothing at first, only motioned for Elias to sit beside him. For a long while they sat in silence, eyes following the slow dance of autumn leaves, spiralling to the ground. Finally, Elias spoke. "I think she no longer loves me, but I cannot prove it. She is still there, but it feels like I am alone." The Watcher nodded slowly. "When the wind changes, the leaves fall. They do not ask permission. They do not explain themselves. They simply know the season has ended." Elias looked down. "So what do I do?" How can I know for certain? The watcher picked up a brittle leaf from the bench and held it up. Love does not leave with loud footsteps. It leaves in silence. It fades like the green of a leaf, first the edges, then the colour, and finally, it breaks away. There are always signs, but they are not shouted. They are whispered. He stood and walked toward a tall tree at the edge of the clearing. This tree has stood here for longer than I have been alive. Each year it lets go of what no longer serves it, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with wisdom. Elias followed him, eyes on the branches swaying above. You want to know if love has left you? Then listen. Do not force her to speak. Do not demand clarity from someone who is unsure of their own heart. Just watch. The signs will come. The watcher turned and placed the leaf in Elias's palm. You will not need to ask. You will already know. In that quiet clearing, surrounded by trees shedding what they no longer needed, Elias understood something he had never wanted to believe. That love, like all things in nature, has its seasons, and when someone begins to fall away from you, the world will not scream. It will whisper through silence, through small absences, through cold mornings that once were warm. What remains is not the fight to keep love, but the strength to witness its change. And in the falling of those first leaves, two signs always appear. 1. They no longer share their inner world with you. The first sign that someone has begun to fall out of love with you is subtle, but devastating. They no longer share their inner world with you. It doesn't come with shouting matches or dramatic exits. No, it arrives quietly, like fog settling over familiar ground. When Elias returned to the village, everything on the surface seemed unchanged. Liana was still there. She still did all the things she had always done. She cooked, cleaned, asked polite questions about the crops, but something fundamental had shifted. Elias, now wiser after learning to truly listen, could hear it in the space between her words. There was a strange emptiness in their exchanges, not loud or cruel, but hollow. The conversations that once danced through dreams, laughter, and fears had become transactional, stripped of depth. She spoke not like someone hiding something, but like someone who no longer felt the need to reveal anything at all. It was in the stillness, in the shortened replies, in the nods that replaced thoughtful words. Once they had sat by the fire for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Those conversations built a bridge between their hearts, but now she answered only what needed to be answered. No more, no less. When Elias asked her what had made her smile that day, she seemed surprised by the question, almost irritated by it, and said, "Nothing in particular." That one moment, that flicker of disinterest, turned the room colder. It was like reaching for a door that had always been open and finding it locked without warning, without explanation. This is the part many men overlook, not because we're blind, but because we often measure love by presence and routine. But the Stoics teach us to observe the nature of things, not just their appearance. The true loss happens not when someone physically walks away, but when they emotionally withdraw and begin to close the gate to their soul. The Watcher once told Elias that every person carries a garden within, a sacred place filled with memories, thoughts, emotions, and dreams. To be loved is to be welcomed into that garden, to walk its paths, to be shown the flowers and the weeds alike. But when someone's love starts to fade, they don't yell or slam the gate in rage. Number. The Stoic wisdom says the gate closes gently, in silence. They stop telling you about their day, not out of secrecy, but because the need to include you is gone. They leave out the little things they once eagerly shared. They no longer ask your opinion, not because they're hiding anything, but because your thoughts no longer shape their own. You still exist in their space, but you're no longer a presence in their inner world. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." But what Stoicism also teaches us is that the greatest remedy for heartbreak is clarity. You must see the signs for what they are, and not colour them with your desperate hopes. When someone stops sharing their world with you, it's not always a betrayal. Sometimes it's simply a shift, a change in the emotional seasons. The garden hasn't been burned down. You've just been gently led out of it. Elias noticed that Liana still smiled, still made tea, still fulfilled her roles, but her mind, her spirit, was elsewhere. Her moments of joy, her frustrations, her silly discoveries and silent tears were no longer brought to him. And that, more than any absence of touch or words, told him the truth. She was gone, but in a way that no door slam could reveal. The philosopher Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But what happens when the one you love no longer gives you anything to listen to? The Stoic answer is firm but freeing. You accept it. You let go of the expectation that they must still invite you in. In Stoic thinking, suffering comes not from the events themselves, but from our judgments about them. The pain Elias felt wasn't caused by Liana's silence. It was caused by his attachment to the idea that she should still speak, should still share, should still feel the same. But the inner world of another person is not a domain we can claim. We are only ever guests, and every invitation has its season. When the gate closes, the Stoic man does not pound on it in anger. He bows his head in understanding and walks away. Not bitter, not broken, but dignified. This is not weakness. This is strength. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So Elias stopped trying to force something that no longer flowed. He asked fewer questions, not out of resentment, but out of respect for what had changed. He no longer chased warmth where only duty remained. He watched, he listened, and in that quiet observation, he learned. The truth was no longer in her words, it was in her silences. It was in what was no longer spoken, in what no longer needed to be said. And here lies the essence of the first sign that love is leaving, when the voice of the heart grows quiet, when someone no longer lets you into their fears, their hopes, their soul. You may still exist in their life, but you have vanished from their thoughts. And once that happens, their actions will follow. The first leaf has fallen. The garden gate is closed. To every man listening now, if you've seen the sign, don't fight it. Don't beg. Don't try to reopen the gate through force. A true Stoic meets reality as it is, not as he wishes it to be. Let this moment teach you, not break you. Use it to grow stronger. And if this message resonates with something you've experienced, if you've ever watched the garden gate quietly close before you, share your story in the comments below. Let others learn from your wisdom. Let your silence now become strength for someone else. And if you agree with this, drop a comment right now. I have complete control over my mind. Like this video, subscribe for more unshakable wisdom, and remind yourself daily, silence isn't distance, it's discipline. 2. They begin to compare you. The second sign that someone is falling out of love with you is subtle but deeply cutting. They begin to compare you. Quietly, almost invisibly. Elias felt this not through words, but through energy, through the quiet betrayals of the eyes and the shifting weight of attention. One late afternoon, as they wandered through the familiar village market, a place once filled with shared jokes and matching footsteps, he noticed that her eyes no longer danced at the same things. They didn't pause together to marvel at oddly shaped fruits or bicker sweetly over spices. Instead, she watched other people. He followed her gaze as it settled on a young couple laughing near the baker's shop. She didn't smile, she didn't frown. Her face remained still, yet Elias felt a storm within. She looked at them the way one looks at a photograph from long ago, something cherished once, but no longer possessed. Later that evening, she offhandedly mentioned liking the dress of another woman at the well. It wasn't flattery, it wasn't praise, it was something else. An unconscious remark delivered with the casual sharpness of someone who didn't realize, or perhaps didn't care, that they had just measured you and found you lacking. Elias said nothing, but he felt everything. The shift was invisible to the world, but deeply visible to the heart. And this is where the silent comparison begins, never cruel, never loud, but always devastating. They start noticing others in the very way they once noticed you. The light in their eyes when you walked into the room starts to show up for someone else's story, someone else's presence. The laughter you once shared becomes quieter. The habits they once loved now irritate them, and your presence begins to feel more like a shadow than a shelter. The Stoics warned us about this, not with rage, but with calm truth. The Watcher once told Elias a tale of a man who carved a statue of his wife, sculpted lovingly from memory. But with time, he began to adjust her features, not to match her more, but to match someone else. A more elegant smile, a different grace, softer, imagined eyes. And though he insisted it was still her, the truth was, he had replaced the real woman he loved with an idea, a fantasy she could never live up to. That's what comparison does. It kills connection by birthing fantasy. It turns love into dissatisfaction. It shifts your partner's mind from what is real and present to what is imagined and absent. And the most haunting part is, it begins with such silence that you might doubt your own instincts. You'll see it in the way they listen more intently to others, the way they lean into someone else's charisma, while their body leans away from yours. You'll see it in how their compliments are no longer yours to receive, but given to strangers, subtly, sparingly, yet repeatedly. Their admiration leaves you, but they never tell you. They just stop being moved by your words. Your presence becomes an old wallpaper, there, familiar but no longer noticed. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be content to seem what you really are." That line holds such weight when someone no longer accepts who you really are, when they become restless with your essence, not because you've changed, but because their eyes are now searching elsewhere. It's not arguments that end relationships. It's not the thunder, it's the sighs, the averted glances, the lack of warmth in moments that once burned with connection. Elias began to feel this in every shared space. He noticed how Liana stopped reaching for his hand in public. Her laughter, so freely given to others, now bypassed him like a breeze that no longer stops at his doorstep. She admired dreams, lifestyles, energies that Elias didn't embody, and never asked him to. But he saw it, and in seeing, he suffered. There is a specific ache in being measured and not told, in knowing someone is still beside you in flesh, but is already walking away in spirit. And this, men, is what Stoicism teaches us to prepare for, not to become bitter, not to retaliate, but to recognize that love based on comparison is not love, it's illusion, and we are not illusions. We are not performers on a stage, seeking applause with every gesture. When someone begins silently comparing you to others, they stop seeing what you do bring, and begin fixating on what you don't. And from there, the heart shifts. It no longer looks inward, where connection is built, but outward, where fantasy reigns. Elias never confronted Liana. He didn't plead, didn't try to outshine the ones she admired. He simply watched, with the quiet acceptance of a man who understood that love cannot be coerced. What he saw was devastating. A woman still sitting beside him, but already gone. Love begins with admiration, but when that admiration gets redirected, replaced, diluted, it doesn't erupt. It erodes, and the worst part isn't being left. It's being forgotten while still present, still speaking, still hoping. This is how the second leaf of love falls, not with an angry goodbye, but with a gaze that has stopped seeing you. So, if you sense this shift, hold your ground. Don't lower your value in hopes of regaining their attention. Don't fight fantasy with performance. Return to your own soul. Return to who you are. Because the moment someone begins comparing you is the moment you must stop comparing yourself to who they want and return to the dignity of who you are. That is the Stoic path. And that is your power. Share your experience in the comments. Or if you're keeping it simple, just drop this in the comments. I understand myself. What should you do when you see the signal? 1. Let go. After many days of watching and waiting, Elias returned once more to the forest. He found the watcher sitting at the same bench, eyes turned toward the same trees, still losing their leaves. Elias sat beside him, the weight of silence hanging heavily on his shoulders. "I have seen the signs," he said. "She does not share herself with me any more, and I feel her comparing me to things I cannot become. So what should I do now?" The watcher did not answer right away. Instead, he bent down and picked up a handful of fallen leaves. He let them fall one by one from his hand, watching how they drifted on the breeze without resistance. "You cannot chase the wind," he said quietly, "and you cannot force a leaf to cling to a branch that no longer feeds it." Elias lowered his head. "Should I fight for her? Should I ask her to stay?" The watcher shook his head gently. "You can ask. You can cry. You can explain every ache in your chest. But if her heart has already walked away, your words will not reach her. You would not be speaking to her. You would be speaking to the memory of who she was. That is the pain of love, not that it ends, but that we keep trying to hold on to what has already gone. The Stoic teachings remind us that true strength comes from accepting reality, not resisting it. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and it is achieved by letting go of what is outside our control. You cannot control how someone feels. You cannot force love to return. You cannot make someone stay if their spirit has already left. But you can control something far more powerful yourself." Elias sat still, eyes on the forest floor. "And how do I do that?" "By not begging for attention, by not lowering your worth to chase something that no longer sees it, by standing where you are and choosing peace over pride. When someone begins to leave, do not chase them into the darkness. Let them walk. And if they return, let it be by choice, not guilt. If they do not, then you will still be standing, whole, undiminished. The greatest mistake we make is thinking that letting go means we did not care. But the opposite is true. Letting go means we cared enough not to trap what wanted to fly. It means we loved enough to stand in our truth over fantasy. So Elias asked, "What should I do tomorrow?" And the watcher answered, "You rise. You water your field. You greet the sun. You care for your life because it is still yours, even if someone has stepped out of it. Let them go, Elias, but do more than just let go." 2. Choose yourself. When someone begins to lose love for you, there are often silent signals before the storm, a growing distance that no longer seeks your presence, a quiet retreat where connection used to thrive, and a subtle shift in energy that no longer reaches for yours. The truth is, most love doesn't disappear in an explosion, it fades in whispers. And when you see these early signs, your instinct may be to chase, to explain, to reclaim what once was. But the ancient Stoics, men who weathered storms without flinching, taught a different path. The first thing you must do is choose yourself. Choose to stand firm like the oak that bends but never breaks. Choose to live not in pursuit of another's affection, but in the fullness of your own becoming. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Your soul is not a bargaining chip. You must never lose yourself in the desperate attempt to keep someone else's fading love. This is not stoic coldness, it is courage. The quiet, unshakable courage to stay grounded when everything around you is drifting like sand through your fingers. The bravery to keep walking forward even when no one walks beside you. The strength in walking alone is not about isolation, but about reclaiming the sacredness of your own spirit. Elias knew this. He was not a man who begged, who pleaded, who burned with rage. When the love in his home went silent, he did not shatter. He simply began to live differently. He did not slam doors or seek closure in dramatic confrontations. Instead, he chose stillness, he chose discipline. He rose early, as he always had. He worked his fields with the same calloused hands, but something within him shifted, not with answers, but with release. He stopped looking at her face for signs of a spark that once lit up their shared world. He no longer waited by the door for the warmth that had grown cold. He accepted what was, and in that powerful acceptance, he found the beginning of peace. One morning, standing at the edge of his land, Elias looked over the fields that had seen seasons of both bounty and barrenness. The air had turned cold, the trees were bare, and yet the land breathed life. So did he. In the reflection of the window, he no longer saw a man abandoned. He saw a man who had not abandoned himself. And that was everything. Love does not always die a violent death. Sometimes it changes its form, into memory, into wisdom, into a quiet kind of freedom. The Stoics reminded us that nothing truly belongs to us, not wealth, not status, not even the affection we cling to. As Epictetus wrote, "Never say of anything, 'I have lost it,' but only, 'I have given it back.' We are custodians, not owners. And when someone's love drifts away from you, it is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it is a teacher. It teaches you to live with presence, to respond with reason, not reactivity, to let go, not with bitterness, but with grace." Elias understood this, and in letting go, he discovered that what he feared was weakness, was in fact his greatest strength. He trusted that life was not punishing him, but redirecting him. He trusted himself, even when the path grew narrow and quiet, and he understood that the absence of her love did not mean the absence of his worth. In that silence, he found something greater than any explanation. He found peace, not the loud kind that announces its arrival, but the kind that settles into your bones like dawn breaking after a long night. He walked away, not broken, not bitter, but whole, because true strength is not in how tightly you hold on. It's in how gracefully you let go. And brother, if you find yourself standing in that same stillness, I say this to you: do not chase what's already walking away. Do not fight for a seat at a table where your presence is no longer wanted. Instead, turn your gaze inward. Begin the quiet work of building a life so rich, so rooted, that love, if it returns, comes not to fill a void, but to share in your abundance. Choose yourself. Choose your soul. Choose the version of you who does not wait in the shadows for permission to live. And when the nights are cold and the silence is loud, remember the words of Seneca. Sometimes, even to live is an act of courage. You are not alone in this. Many men before you have stood at this crossroad, feeling the sting of love's retreat. But the ones who became legends, the ones who lived with quiet dignity, are those who walked forward, not with revenge in their hearts, but with wisdom in their step. So now I ask you, what will you do when love no longer looks your way? Will you collapse, or will you rise? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story, your resilience, your truth. Someone else might need to hear it today. So, my friend, thank you for walking with me through this reflection. I know these words might have stirred something inside you, a memory, a scar, or even a quiet truth you've been trying to avoid. And if they did, that's okay. That's how wisdom works. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers when we least expect it. Let me speak to you plainly, from one human soul to another. When someone starts to lose love for you, it doesn't always come with a dramatic ending. Most times, it comes quietly. They stop showing up in the little ways. They stop choosing you in moments where they used to. And eventually, you feel like a guest in a place where you once felt at home. But hear me, that does not mean you're unworthy of love. It simply means the season is changing. An old Stoic wisdom tells us, we do not cling to the leaves when the tree knows it's time to let go. I want you to be strong enough to see the signs, not from a place of fear, but from a place of clarity. Recognize the shift not as a rejection, but as a redirection, back toward your own self-worth, your own path, your own peace. Now I ask you again, have you seen these signs in your relationships? Have you felt that slow, quiet retreat, like a tide pulling away from the shore? If you have, you're not alone. We've all been there, in that quiet, aching space between holding on and letting go. So here's my advice, as simple and sincere as I can give it. Don't chase what's slipping away. Don't beg for the love that's already looking elsewhere. Instead, hold your head high, accept the truth with dignity, and let your silence speak your worth. That's not weakness, that's strength, that's stoic grace. Now, I invite you, take a moment, breathe, reflect deeply, and if you feel ready, share your story in the comments. Tell us how you found the courage to let go, or how you're still finding your strength day by day. Your story matters. Your voice might be the light for someone else's dark tunnel. Because wisdom, true wisdom, is not about knowing all the answers. It's about living through the questions and sharing what you learn along the way. Remember this: love is never something we own. It's something we live, we give, and sometimes we release. And in the releasing, we honor both ourselves and the love that once was. So stay grounded, stay wise, stay kind to your heart, and until next time, walk forward with clarity, with courage, and with quiet strength. I'll see you in the next video. Peace to you, always.